show what time we actually go online, as in, well, able to show in general what time of the day I go online, but also when I hit stream, what time I'm actually, how many seconds does it take for the stream to actually start. Now I can hear it. So there's about 5 seconds or so delay, I think. Bear with me a sec. Just share the stream quickly, just in case more people want to join. We don't actually use it just to piss Elon Musk. It was bad before Musk, and I do not believe it's gonna be much better after. We also do LinkedIn mainly. It's where most of our activity is, and I'm actually using it. Just need this. Oh, come on, don't go into. Just will live. It's live stream, just so that people are not shocked by the poor quality. There you go. So we have this tool. It's scrolling through EEG. The EEG is available on this website here if you want to check it out. No, it's too small, sorry for that. I can't make it larger. I'll put it in the description. Actually put it in the chat as well. That's not my website, it's just a repository made by Penn University. So we're using the data from there. We have this HTML. Sorry, my logos don't work. We'll fix them later. Yeah, it's really just loading this Flask application. The IEG.org has a scroller player web application as well. That yeah, similar, different. We'll just do our own. Try to do better. I don't think it will be very hard. Theirs was also developed quite some time ago. You can download data using MATLAB or Python code. I did it ages ago in MATLAB, and then converting. I just have a text file of the thing. It's a 16 channel EEG, as you can tell from the number of channels here. Yeah, I had some issues with like scaling this window and stuff, but let's get a GPT-4. Now it's called Advanced Data Analysis, whatever. It's actually the same as, pretty much the same as Code Interpreter by the sound and feel. They're still kept at 50 messages every 3 hours. So, so once we reach that limit, we'll finish the stream. We'll probably do it much earlier as well. So currently we're having a few issues. One being, I want to change the overlay options to and to group the channels in different ways. So the off, which is default, should look like this. Should have all the channels in different maybe different colors. I don't really like the colors, but I don't mind it. But then you could group them by side. So you have 8 electrodes on the left, 8 electrodes on the right. So this should turn them into side by side. That doesn't work at the moment. So this is what we're trying to check. One, we have a problem with a JSON script file, which is this one, which we were messing around with quite a bit yesterday. It's still under 100 lines of code, which is good. But we're not having much luck resolving that issue. Yesterday, my best understanding is that there's some sort of compatibility issue between some of the Plotly functions that this code is using. Maybe they were updated, so some sort of something wasn't back compatible, so things don't work. But let's pop this code quickly. We want our intern to not sit idle.
The JavaScript code you provided appears to be for a web page that includes a Plotly plot. This script aims to handle various interactivities like resizing the plot when the browser window is resized, updating the plot based on user-selected overlay options, and updating the separation between channel waveforms. The script waits for the DOM to be fully loaded before attaching any event listeners. Here's a brief overview of each function and what it does. This function resizes the Plotly plot whenever the browser window is resized. It does this by calling Plotly, plots, resized plot div, where plot div is the div containing the Plotly plot. When grouped is selected, it changes the line color and line style for each trace. When overlay all is selected, it sets all traces to have a black color and an opacity of 0.5. For any other option, it sets all traces to have a black color and an opacity of 1. This function updates the vertical separation between channel waveforms based on the value entered in an input box with the ID sep value. It updates the Y data of each trace by adding an offset based on the entered separation value. Window, add event listener, resize plot, attaches the resize plot function to the Windows resize event. Document, get element by ID, overlay options, add event listener, change, update overlay, attaches the update overlay function to the change event of the overlay options dropdown. Document, get element by ID, sep value, add event listener, input, update separation, attaches the update separation function to the input event of the sep value. The code also includes basic error handling, such as checking whether plotdiv and plotdiv data are defined and logging errors to the console if they're not. The console.log statements are for debugging and will print messages to the browser's JavaScript console.
That still being generated. So we have this error handling in it because we had this error already yesterday.
Overall, it seems like a well-structured script for managing a Plotly plot with various interactivity options. Is there something specific you would like to know more about or any specific questions you have regarding this code? It looks like you're encountering an issue where plot div data is undefined. The plot div itself seems to be defined, as you can see it in the console log, but it doesn't have a data property. In Plotly, the data for the plot is usually stored in the JavaScript object representing the plot, not directly on the HTML div element. In your case, it appears that plot div is referring to the HTML div element, which doesn't have a data property by default. Here are a few suggestions to debug the issue. Make sure that the Plotly plot is actually initialized and rendered inside the div with the id equals plot. The Plotly object should be available after you create a plot using Plotly, new plot, plot, data, layout, or similar Plotly functions. To access the data of a Plotly plot, you may need to use Plotly's JavaScript API. You can use Plotly, React, plot, data, layout, or Plotly, new plot, plot, data, layout, to draw the plot and then use something like this to access its data. Ensure that you're trying to access the data property after the Plotly plot has been initialized. If you're running the script before the Plotly plot is initialized, the data property will naturally be undefined. Add more debugging lines to see where the problem might be. For example, you can check if the Plotly object is defined. If you're still encountering issues, it might be helpful to look at the entire flow of your JavaScript code and HTML structure to see where the problem lies.
And that's the entire JavaScript This is the HTML.
The HTML file you posted suggests that you're using Flask to serve a Plotly plot within a div with the ID, plot. You're also including a script, EEG, which presumably contains the JavaScript code you posted earlier. Here are some possible reasons why plot div data might be undefined. The Plotly script is loaded asynchronously with the async attribute. This means that the Plotly library might not be available immediately when the DOM is ready, which could lead to issues if you're initializing the plot or trying to manipulate it immediately after the DOM loads. It's not clear where and how the Plotly plot is being initialized. If the Plotly plot is not initialized properly, then plot div data would be undefined. Ensure that the plot is initialized before the JavaScript code runs. You're using Flask to inject the Plotly plot HTML, fig_HTML, safe. Make sure that fig_HTML actually contains a fully initialized Plotly plot. If it doesn't, your JavaScript code won't be able to manipulate it as expected. Remove async or add defer. Remove the async attribute from the Plotly script tag or replace it with defer to ensure that the script is executed after the HTML is parsed. HTML copy code less than script defer src equals https://cdn.plot.ly/plotly-latest.min.
What just happened with the text to speech, but yes, we have a Flask. We wanna, so it does say undefined, plot if data undefined. Why do I add this line? Where do I place this line?
You can place the line console.log, is Plotly defined, type of Plotly. == undefined, within the DOM content loaded event listener in your EEG.js file to check if Plotly has been loaded by that point. This will help you verify whether the Plotly library is available when your script runs. Here's how you could modify your EEG.js to include this debug line. If the console prints is Plotly defined, false, that means Plotly hasn't loaded yet when this script is running. In that case, you'll need to ensure that your Plotly script is loaded before your custom JavaScript runs, possibly by removing the async attribute from the Plotly script tag, or using the defer attribute as mentioned in previous suggestions.
Yeah, let's check this. Sorry, my voice. We have another. No, we only have this undefined. So that's the our suggestion was to remove this async. If I understand correctly.
If the console prints is Plotly defined, false, that means Plotly hasn't loaded yet when this script is running. In that case, you'll need to ensure that your Plotly script is loaded before your custom JavaScript runs, possibly by removing the async attribute from the Plotly script tag, or using the defer attribute as mentioned in previous suggestions.
So remove this async, comment that out. Let's see what that does. Reload with Ctrl F5. Takes some time. So this still works okay. I'm still getting the same error. This is pretty annoying. Pretty annoying. Defer attribute, not sure about that. remove the async from HTML, but still getting the same error.
If removing the async attribute didn't resolve the issue, let's try a few more debugging steps. Check if Plotly is loaded. Add the following code snippet at the beginning of your DOM content loaded event listener in your JavaScript file. JS JavaScript copy code console.log. Is Plotly defined? Type up Plotly. == undefined. If it prints false, then Plotly is not yet loaded when the script runs. If it prints false, then Plotly is not yet loaded when the script runs. Verify Flask variable. Make sure that fig_html Flask variable is correctly initialized with the Plotly plot in your backend code. Explicit plot initialization. Consider explicitly initializing the Plotly plot within your JavaScript. This way, you can be sure that the plot exists before trying to manipulate it.
Right, so we have that line console log. It's Plotly defined, type of Plotly undefined, and we tried it already. Get the undefined.
Thank you for sharing the console output. It appears that the HTML element with the ID plot div is being correctly identified, but its data attribute is undefined. This suggests that the Plotly plot is either not initialized or not accessible through the methods you're using. Here are a few additional suggestions to troubleshoot. You mentioned that you removed the async attribute, but did you check whether Plotly is actually loaded at the point your JavaScript runs? You can place the following line of code inside the DOM content loaded event handler to check. Make sure that the Flask variable fig_html actually contains a fully initialized Plotly plot. If it's not initialized correctly, then plot div data would naturally be undefined. If you have control over the Flask code, try returning only the data and layout objects from Flask, then use those to explicitly initialize the Plotly plot using JavaScript. After the plot is explicitly initialized, plot div data should be defined. You can use Plotly's Plotly_afterplot event to run your code only after the plot has been created. This ensures that plot div data would be defined. If the plot is being rendered via a React component, or if you're using the Plotly React method, you might need to wait for the plot to fully render before attempting to manipulate it. By systematically checking each of these points, you should be able to identify where the issue lies.
Okay, so we already have this line. Big HTML actually contains fully initialized Plotly plot. Flask side. So this will be in our app API, the Python script, the Flask application.
Your Flask code appears to be correctly generating a Plotly figure and converting it to HTML using pio.to_html. This HTML is then passed to your template and inserted into the page. However, the div element where the plot is inserted, plot div in your JavaScript code, won't have a data property accessible directly. The Plotly figure's data and layout information are embedded in the HTML and JavaScript that pio.to_html generates. These details are not stored as properties of the div element itself. Here are a few options to consider for accessing and manipulating the Plotly data. After the Plotly figure is initialized, you can use Plotly's JavaScript API to get the plot's data, or to update the plot. Another option is to reinitialize the Plotly plot using JavaScript. You can get the initial data and layout from the Flask server, then use Plotly new plot to initialize the plot. After this, you can use Plotly update or other Plotly JavaScript API methods to update the plot. If you want to perform some action as soon as the plot has been initialized, you can use Plotly's Plotly_afterplot event. As a last resort, you could delay the execution of the JavaScript code that...
No, I don't want last resort. Let's just do work. So in JavaScript, how are we doing? So we are using the Plotly JavaScript API. We're using update, no. We're using update. Where should I place this line? So I want to do that one because we're already using.
Update method is used to update the data and layout of an existing Plotly plot. The typical syntax looks like this. Where to place this line depends on what you're trying to achieve. Based on your original JavaScript code, there are two likely candidates. If you're looking to update the plot based on changes in the overlay options, you can place Plotly update inside the update overlay function. You would replace the existing logic that manipulates plot div data. If you're looking to update the plot based on changes to the separation value, you can place Plotly update inside the update separation function. Again, you would replace the existing logic that manipulates plot div data.
Right, so currently we're using
functions, you would
redraw.
construct the update object
And suggesting to use a Plotly update. I'm not sure why the redraw doesn't work, but something to do with Plotly compatibility, potentially versioning. Let's reload this. It's working. EEG.js line 19. No, that's just where the console log is. It's actually line 55. No, it doesn't tell me anything useful. Plot div data still undefined. Right, that line is also used in so we have one here instead of redraw. This one is already update. Try. Where's the try? Plot update instead of redraw. Still doesn't work. Still get that plot div data undefined. What does it mean again?
The issue seems to persist, where the plot div data is still undefined. This indicates that the Plotly plot's data is not accessible via the div element directly, which is expected behavior. The div element, plot div in your JavaScript, that contains the Plotly plot does not hold the plot data as a property. The data and layout are actually part of the JavaScript object that Plotly creates to represent the plot. Here are some things you might consider. You can access the data of an existing Plotly plot using Plotly's JavaScript API. You can use this line to replace where you were trying to access plot div data. You need to make sure that Plotly has been loaded and the plot has been initialized before trying to access its data. You can do this by listening for a Plotly event that fires after the plot is created. Another way to ensure the data is accessible is to reinitialize the plot using JavaScript after the page has loaded. You could request the data and layout JSON objects from the Flask backend and then use Plotly, new plot to create the plot on the client side. Ensure Plotly is available at the time your custom JavaScript runs. If it returns false, then the Plotly library hasn't loaded yet, and you need to ensure it loads before your custom script runs. As a last resort for debugging, try adding a delay, using setTimeout, before running your code to manipulate the Plotly plot. This is not a recommended practice but can help in debugging whether timing is the issue. By trying out these steps, you should be able to identify why you're unable to access the plot data and rectify the issue accordingly.
Where do I place? Oh. Place it in the beginning like that, not sure. No, it's giving me errors. Where do I place the following JavaScript?
You can place the Plotly_afterplot event listener inside the DOM content loaded event listener in your existing JavaScript code, EEG.js. This will ensure that this piece of code runs only after the plot is fully initialized by Plotly. Here's how you can integrate it into your existing code. By placing the Plotly_afterplot event listener within the DOM content loaded block, you're telling the browser to execute this code once the Plotly plot has been fully initialized. This way, plot data should contain the data of the plot, allowing you to manipulate it as needed.
Well, okay, now I'm not getting. I'm not getting any errors at all, but still doesn't work. I have to check the actual function. It should be in the network as well. Which one's that? It's got the debugging overflow on the images. Yeah, whatever. Doesn't seem relevant. This one.
The error message uncaught type error, document, get element by ID, on is not a function suggests that the on method is not available on the element returned by document, get element by ID, plot. This likely means that the Plotly plot has not been fully initialized at the time when this code is executed, or that the returned element is not a Plotly plot object. Plotly's on method is a jQuery-like syntax that's specific to Plotly's custom event system. If the plot isn't fully initialized, or if the div hasn't been turned into a Plotly plot yet, then the on method won't be available. Here are some options to address this issue. You can try delaying the attachment of the event listener using setTimeout to ensure that the plot has been fully initialized. Another approach would be to use more general JavaScript event listeners. However, this won't guarantee that the code runs after the Plotly plot is initialized. A more reliable way would be to explicitly initialize the Plotly plot using JavaScript after the DOM is fully loaded. You can obtain the data and layout from your Flask backend and then use Plotly, new plot to initialize the plot. After the plot is initialized, you can attach the event listener. Make sure you are using a version of Plotly that supports the Plotly_afterplot event. Update to the latest version if necessary. As a last resort for debugging, you can manually check if the Plotly plot has been initialized by inspecting the div element in the browser's developer tools. Look for data attributes or a filled_full data property, which could indicate that the plot has been initialized. Please note that using setTimeout is generally not recommended for production code, as it's not a reliable way to determine whether the plot has been initialized. It's mostly useful for debugging and quick and dirty solutions.
Yeah, we're not clicking on the chart though, we're clicking on HTML items. So we probably should yeah, probably should go for this one. Just regenerating the chart.
Yes, explicitly initializing the Plotly plot in JavaScript offers you more control and ensures that the plot is ready when you try to manipulate it. Here's how you can go about it. Modify your Flask root to return the data and layout as JSON objects instead of an HTML string. In your JavaScript code, fetch the data and layout from the Flask backend and use Plotly, new plot to initialize the plot. This way, you can be certain that the Plotly plot is ready to be manipulated when your event listeners and other code execute. The Plotly_afterplot event listener will be attached only after the plot is successfully initialized.
You regenerate the code. So I wouldn't know how to. Oh, don't do it in the. It's doing it on the server. No, it's okay. To ask it to generate everything as text. Where did my instructions go? They had this custom instructions, right? It seemed to be. Is it disabled? Probably have to enable this. Yeah, I don't want it to run anything on this on the OpenAI server. How much? Yeah, we don't get much progress. Trace
I
back.
apologize for the confusion. I can't run the Flask app in this environment.
Don't
However,
run it.
you can copy the code above and run it on your local system.
Yeah.
Please note that you'll have to replace the placeholder for the file path /path/to/your/data/file.txt with the actual path to your data file. This version of app.py includes a new root, get_plot_data that returns the Plotly data and layout as JSON objects. This is to facilitate the fetching of data and layout via AJAX in your front-end JavaScript code. Once you have this Flask app running, you can proceed to fetch this data in your JavaScript code and initialize the Plotly plot as I described in my previous message. Remember to start your Flask app by running Flask run or Python app.py, depending on your setup, in your terminal.
Yeah, original file is the original data file is 2 GB worth of text file, plain text. Shall we convert it into JSON? Would it make things work better?
If the original data file is 2 gigabytes, it's not advisable to convert the entire file to JSON and send it to the client. Such a large file would result in very slow load times and could even crash the browser. Moreover, Flask and most other web servers have limits on how much data can be sent in a single response, so you'd likely hit those limits as well. Instead, consider these alternative approaches. Only load and send the specific portion of the data that the client needs to see. The server can handle filtering and aggregation operations, returning only the necessary data to the client. If you need to display a large amount of data over time, consider streaming the data to the client in chunks. This way, the client can start displaying the first chunk while the rest of the data is still being transmitted. Load only a part of the data initially, and then load more as the user scrolls or navigates through the plot. For some use cases, it might be acceptable to display a summarized or downsampled version of the data, rather than the full 2 gigabytes file. This would dramatically reduce the amount of data that needs to be sent to the client. If the same data is viewed multiple times, you can cache it on the client side to avoid re-downloading it. This is more of an optimization than a solution to the initial problem, though. If you absolutely must send a large amount of data to the client, consider using a binary data format like protocol buffers or BSON instead of JSON to reduce the size of the data. For your specific case where you're only showing a small portion of the data initially, duration _ to display initially in seconds, you can stick to your current approach of loading only the required data points from the text file. The key is to not load the entire 2 gigabytes file into memory, either on the client or the server.
Yeah, anyway, I wasn't suggesting to load the whole 2 gigabytes. I said if the text file, if we're now doing JSON in here, should we just turn the text file into JSON to begin with, and then take chunks of the JSON file? But yeah, that's fine. Let's delete those copies for a sec. Create a copy of that. Get plot data. Same code to create the Plotly figure. It's returning JSON data. What's that bit there?
Apologies for the oversight. The comment hash, same code to create the Plotly figure, was meant to indicate that you should use the same code for creating the Plotly figure as you do in your root. In your specific case, you could actually extract the code for generating the Plotly figure into a separate function that both roots can call. This way, you avoid duplicating code. Here's how you can refactor app.py to include this function. In this refactored code, both the and get _plot_ data roots call create _plot_ figure to generate the Plotly figure. The root uses the figure to render a template, presumably embedding the figure into the HTML, while get _plot_ data returns the figure's data and layout as JSON.
This is the original Python code. What changes do we need to make to use a JSON to load the data into HTML?
To use JSON to pass data to your HTML frontend, you need to make a few changes. Create a new root in your Flask app to serve the plot data in JSON format. In your frontend JavaScript, fetch this JSON data to render the Plotly plot. Here's how to go about it. Modify your Flask app to include a new root that will serve the plot data in JSON format. In your frontend JavaScript, fetch the data and layout from the Flask backend and use Plotly, new plot to initialize the plot. This way, you fetch the plot data and layout as JSON from the Flask backend and initialize the Plotly plot on the client side. Once the plot is initialized, you can attach any event listeners or manipulate it as needed. Remember to include this JavaScript code in the same HTML file where your plot will be displayed, ensuring that an element with id = plot exists. By using this approach, you make sure that the Plotly plot is fully initialized on the client side, allowing you to manipulate it freely.
Let's see if it taking a, oh come on, it's still doing stuff in the browser. But it's doing it. You can copy it from here. Channel names look correct. Yeah, it's trying to execute on the server. Don't do that.
I apologize for the confusion.
It's okay. It's fine. Yes, the file name is there. So this should be using JSON. Now we also need to update JavaScript. So this is the this is what I currently have for no, wait for to be EEG JSON. Okay, we only got 15 minutes to go in this stream. Not making much progress, barely any today. That's okay. It's Friday. No one's making progress on Friday. No, I'm just kidding.
It then initializes the Plotly plot using Plotly, new plot. Once the plot is initialized, it attaches the event listeners and other functionalities that you already had in your original EEG.js. This updated EEG.js should replace your current one. It includes your original code where appropriate but adds the fetch and initialization steps. This ensures that the Plotly plot is fully initialized before any of your existing code runs.
Well, first it has all these missing bits, which we asked not to have. Date overlay. Resize plot. It wasn't actually changed. It's the same. Fetch. So we're doing fetch data from Flask, fetching JSON. So that's obviously the new bit. But I want the full integration, please. Keep refusing. Um, please generate the whole thing.
Certainly, here's the updated EEG.js JavaScript code in its entirety. It includes the original functionality along with the new code to fetch the data and layout for the Plotly plot from the Flask backend.
Thank you. Yeah, now it's actually populating the functions, which is great. So it will change the line call. We can't test it because we were getting that error, but it will, yeah, do all sorts of fancy things when we change the overlay type. That should be good, and later we'll deal with the separation
This
value.
includes fetching the Plotly data and layout from the Flask server, get_plot_data. Initializing the Plotly plot, Plotly, new plot. Event listener for after the Plotly plot is drawn, Plotly_afterplot. Functionality to resize the plot when the window is resized, resize plot. Functionality to update the layout based on overlay options, update overlay. Functionality to update the separation between channel waveforms, update separation. You can replace your current EEG.js file with this updated code. It should be fully compatible with your updated Flask backend.
Thank you for that. I don't know why it's 10 lines shorter. It's a bit odd, but we will test it anyway. It's now using JSON to communicate between things. So the original thing is working okay. Already getting a type error. Something is not valid JSON. We already had this error. It's when you have like nans, not a number in the data. Get things like that, and that still doesn't work. Get plot. So get 500 internal error for getting the plot. Why? That's not cool. I mean, everything seemed to work exactly the same as before.
A 500 internal server error generally indicates that something has gone wrong on the server side. To troubleshoot this issue, you can take the following steps. When you run your Flask app, it will output logs to the terminal. Check there for any Python errors or stack traces. This can give you a clue as to what went wrong. Make sure that the data you are trying to send as JSON can actually be serialized. For example, not all Python objects can be converted to JSON. The data inside your Plotly fig object should generally be JSON serializable, but it's worth double checking. You can add print statements or use a debugger to trace what is happening in your get_plot_data route. For example, try printing out fig, data, and fig, layout, before the return JSONify line to see what data is actually being sent. Make sure that the data path in FN is correct and accessible and that the data format is as expected. Review the changes you made to ensure they were implemented correctly. Make sure the function create_plot_figure returns a valid Plotly figure object and that the root get_plot_data is correctly set up to serialize this figure to JSON. If you could provide any error messages or logs, that would be extremely helpful for more specific troubleshooting. The 500 internal server error suggests that there's something wrong in your server-side Flask code. To diagnose the issue, you should look into the Flask server logs. When you run the Flask app from the terminal, any errors or stack traces will be displayed there, which can provide more details about what might be going wrong. Here are some specific things The error message, unexpected token, less than, suggests that the server is not returning a JSON response, but rather an HTML page. This is often the case when the server returns an error page, like a 500 internal server error page, instead of the expected JSON data. Here are some debugging steps you can follow to resolve this issue. When you run your Flask app, it should output logs to the terminal. Look for any error messages or stack traces that indicate what went wrong. Try accessing http://127.0.0.1:5000/get_plot_data in your web browser and see what it returns. If everything is set up correctly, it should return a JSON object. If it's an HTML error page, then you'll know something is wrong on the server side. You can add print statements in your Flask route to debug what might be going wrong. For example, this will print the error to your console and return it as JSON data, making it easier to debug what went wrong. After making these changes, rerun your Flask app and check the logs. This should give you a clearer picture of what is causing the error.
Yeah, that thing. Yeah, I have 8 minutes to go.
The error messages suggest a couple of things. Calling _do plot as if redrawing, but this container doesn't yet have a plot. This warning indicates that the code is attempting to redraw a plot in a container that doesn't yet have a plot. This could happen if Plotly, new plot hasn't successfully created a plot yet. Plotly, plots, getPlotDiv is not a function. This error suggests that Plotly, plots, getPlotDiv is not a recognized function, possibly because the Plotly plot has not been successfully initialized. Here are some steps to debug. Make sure the Plotly library is loaded before your script runs. Ensure the Plotly script tag in your HTML is set up correctly. Ensure that the element with the id plot is available in the DOM when your JavaScript code runs. You're already doing this by waiting for the DOM content loaded event, which is good. Add some debugging lines in your JavaScript fetch and initialization code to better understand the flow of data. Here's a modified version of your JavaScript code with added debugging lines. Run this modified code and check the browser console for the log messages. It should give you a better understanding of where exactly things might be going wrong.
Something. Wait. Format document. What? That's not right. JSON script. Wait a second. Can we do this again? Might take this offline.
Certainly, here's a fully updated EEG.js code that includes debugging statements and retains your original functionality.
Let's just take this offline. Yeah, it did really break now. Might go to the previous version as well. If we're not able to solve this, yeah, something happens like halfway. It's when there's this delay. It's the delay. And I remember So regenerating the JavaScript, the whole JavaScript at the moment, just to make sure it's just adding
This
debugging
JavaScript code
logging.
now waits for the DOM to be fully loaded. Fetches the plot data and layout from the Flask backend. Initializes the Plotly plot. Attaches the original event listeners and functionalities you had in your script. Includes debugging messages to help you trace any issues.
So to begin with, and those errors are okay. Yeah, and then that. What's up with that? So yeah, I can't find get the plot data internal server error. Can you solve this quickly for us?
HTTP 500 error. Your Flask root is encountering an error, specifically with JSON serialization. Error. Object of type scattergoal is not JSON serializable. This indicates that the object you're trying to serialize to JSON in your Flask root isn't directly serializable. Plot initialization. The Plotly plot is not being initialized correctly, possibly due to the backend error or the data format. First, let's address the Flask issue. Instead of serializing the Plotly figure directly, you can use Plotly's built-in methods to convert it to JSON. Make sure to import the necessary modules. In your front-end JavaScript code, you are using Plotly, plots, getPlotDiv, which seems to be incorrect. To get the data, you can directly use the data attribute from the plots div element. Here's the relevant part updated. Apply these changes and see if it resolves your issues. Make sure to look at the Flask server logs to understand if any server-side issues still persist.
Can regenerate both. Try. Both app and JavaScript. And while it's doing that, we might just say bye-bye, because we got only 1 minute left this stream. Hopefully we'll able to probably solve this next week, and it then will appear on bunnychaos.com for you to play with. So see you next week. Bye.